Another thing I was fascinated with this particular piece was the shadows.
Even before I want to ask about the show, I sort of want to ask about some things that happened before the show, like the voices we hear, and we hear it at the end of the show. Also, who are we sort of hearing talking? And what
you are sort of hearing the voice of Zora Neale Hurston.
Mm-hmm. So how come you decided you wanted us to hear her first?
The more and more I worked on the piece, it really was about my experience of rereading Zora's book and the ideas and how she plays with the story and who she was as a writer, as a black female, important figure of the Harlem Renaissance or the Negro Renaissance. And I love her voice, and it's just interesting to hear this voice.
So Rhetta, you're nodding. You like to have that voice in the room when you're coming into the space?
Reggie has always said that he likes to, he's something in him loves to hear women's voices that sound like men. And it's that hello. So it's that deep rumble, and we have a member that has passed on and gone, Sister Elaine, and she had an even deeper voice than I did. And he just loves that kind of sound around him. And I don't know if it's something from his past or, his grannies or aunties or just, just that
Mothers,
sound.
cousins,
Mothers,
aunts.
cousins, everybody.
I love the Mylar. I feel like it instantly says, like, theater or spectacle or something, but then it gets crammed into this suitcase. So I'm just curious about when the suitcase started.
Well, the suitcase and the Mylar are slightly two different stories, but I like hearing the different interpretations or stories or how people explain what's going on. I love just hearing, that feels new for me.
Oh, I got more.
Yeah, no, but I don't feel like I've heard someone talk about it in that way, and I really like that idea of taking theatricality, like presenting something theatrically, but then taking out all the quote-unquote normal conventions of it and kind of, we're post-modernizing it. One of my family members, when they came to see us in Chicago, she leaned over to her husband and said, "Reggie could have did that before the show."
Oh, yeah.
So, to this day, that's my favorite.
Raja, maybe I want to ask you about this, because you make this choice to introduce us to all the dancers. And Raja, you give us the 1.6 years with the company, which is a delightful sort of bit of humor, but then it comes back.
That's just for here. It won't happen again, because it won't be 1.6.
The longer you stay, that number's got to change. But then it comes back again I think of it as the sort of the math or the fractal section, that number. And so you've sort of given us a little bit of foreshadowing of the numbers with that. And just, Raja, can you talk a little bit about what it's like to come out, introduce yourself, and then, I don't know, disappear?
When we first were given that assignment, it feels like an assignment to me. And when we were first given that assignment, it sort of reminds me of who I am going into this work. Reggie often talks about us needing and his desire for us to be people-y. We're relating to each other. We are ourselves. And that's a really fantastic reminder right before we start performing. This is where I am, this is where I've come from. I'm from Fort Hood, Texas, and this is how long I've been doing this.
I want to ask you about the Eli, Eli, the extraordinary singing and staging of that. If you could talk about how the process of arranging that song, and at what point the very complicated but subtle dancing happens underneath it, and then here comes Reggie's voice, a third voice that comes into it. Could you just talk a little bit about the process of making that section?
You ain't talking to me. You talking to him. He the man that orchestrate that kind of stuff. He'll bring in the research in the first place, which is Big Bertha came in from some research that you had seen some footage. She was, this is old field footage, people singing in a praise house, and she's there with her people, and they're singing. And for me, that was a really great place to start, because I could then start, because I have a theater background, so I don't come from dance straight up. So I want to process and want to get at that information. So for me, it was like seeing her sweating, seeing her clapping, seeing the rhythm picking up, seeing that depth of going into it, and really feeling that. That's what I get to process.
Rhetta and Lawrence have been singing with me for a really long time, and then with this piece, I wanted to get them moving a little bit more, so they were learning the steps that the dancers knew. So they were in the corner practicing the steps, or their version of the steps. And one of the residencies, we had to do a kind of public sharing or showing, and I don't know, it just happened, and I was just like, can y'all do the material and sing it at the same time? And they struggled, and they struggled, and they did it. And then we showed it, and people reacted to it, and we kept going with it, and it became incorporated into the full piece.
Raja, can you talk a little bit about, I'm sorry to be calling it the leapfrog section, but I think maybe you know what I mean, the diagonal that comes down and different people are coming in and out of the line. What do you call that?
The sixes.
The sixes. I mean, you've already been dancing full out for a while, and now we have another giant thing, but the space often in this dance is really compressed among these big, mostly giant bodies and one giant mover. Can you just talk a little bit about how you keep that spilling forward and at the same time so precise and contained?
I like getting tired and having to push by it, and that's probably one of my favorite sections because of that. And I often have to not smile. Like I think when I'm coming around, and I think I look at Dwayne quite a bit. He's after me, and I'm like, I'm running, and I'm so tired. And then I get to do it again. We have like 4 more iterations of this, and I'm gonna pass out or not. And what's great about this section for me is that it has checkpoints, and you don't often get that. So I have these checkpoints. I'm back here. I'm back here. We're really a community in that section, and it's really we really get to touch each other, and that's something that Reggie pressed. First, it was about the timing and about the puzzle, and it was very individual in my opinion. And then Reggie wanted us to come together, really touch and grab each other, connect down to go on, connect down to go on.
Reggie, you said to me yesterday that you're figuring out about the head wraps and that it's something that you're exploring that's newer to the work. I'm wondering if you could talk about why change a work that is done, like it premiered, it had a New York season, and so why keep tinkering with it, and then why bring in something that signifies so much history and culture?
For me, the premiere is never the end of the piece, and even like now, this is not the end of the piece. And I think that with all the performers, that's one of the ways that I keep these really smart, intelligent, beautiful, bodied individuals interested and compelled, because they're still figuring stuff out. We did a shorter version of this work recently on Governor's Island in New York, and I had recently, there's Kara Walker's Subtlety.
Just a big sculpture in the old Domino
they
Sugar
closed the
building.
Domino Sugar factory, and she made this like colossal sphinx as a black woman, and she has a head tie on. Kara Walker's images are always kind of very troubling. And even when I came up with the name for my company, or found this title, this derogatory name for ring shouts, Fist&Heel worshiping, this idea of people practice, communities practice things or have things that are really valuable to them, but then folks outside of that culture community often misinterpret it. And if there's a hierarchy or a power game going on, a lot of times they will take that thing and make it into a negative. And the community that does it might actually start to think of those things as negative. So for me, the head tie was one of these things that had always kind of hung over my head, as especially after traveling in Africa, and you see women tie their heads in these beautiful ways. And traditionally, it means if you're married, if you're not married. And then the spiritual Baptist community in Trinidad and Tobago tells what kind of spiritual powers you have, what kind of connections, how much learning you have. It's like, you know, wearing your degree or your robe with you. And, you know, the piece isn't about small issues. And I grew up in the Black church, so those ideas of what it meant to tie your head, what it meant not, you know, to go out. You didn't go out with your head tied, you know, with a head rag on. What does it mean for you to see these, it's 6 of y'all, right? 6 people that you've really come to know and understand, and you see them, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, they're just slaves. So wait, they're not, are they slaves? Or wait, is it labor? Is it work? So this idea of image and labor and slave wages or slave non-wages.
But I'm really curious if you could all say something about maybe how your relationship to Moses or Moseses has changed over the process of making this work.
Well, personally, it has changed and evolved for me because we just also, as Reggie mentioned, finished an extended period of him like going back into the piece and sort of looking at the life of it and giving it another statement. To see him and be part of the art as he is involved in it, like, you know, trying to understand this work that he's doing is very wonderful, and I think that's why I stay with him so long.
The piece started before it was a piece. The idea cracking open. There was it was going to Israel, reading Zora Neale Hurston's book, and meeting Anna's Uncle Avi, and he said, "Show me your Moses, and I'll tell you who you are." So just that idea of a figure or a story in a very Joseph Campbell kind of way, could have so many perspectives and working with Reggie Wilson on fractals and getting a deeper understanding of what that means, how that continues to, so thinking about Zora, thinking about leadership, thinking about Martin Luther King, thinking about Harriet Tubman, thinking about my relationship to Ohad, thinking about other postmodern choreographers in the dance, you know, Judson Dance Theater, and how those ideas, you know, just continue to unfold infinitely. Like the same idea from an infinite number of sides is infinitely different. So it's never was just Moses, but it's still all of those ideas, but it still is about leadership and trust, and how do you and why do you trust somebody to go somewhere?
Well, Moses, don't get lost
in the Red Sea.
Start your rod and come across
In the Red Sea.
Well, Moses, Pharaoh coming
In the Red Sea.
Can't you hear them horses running
In the Red Sea.
Well, Moses, don't get
In the
lost
Red Sea.
Start your rod and come across
In the Red Sea.
Well, Moses, don't get lost
In the Red Sea.
Start your rod and come across
In the Red Sea.
March your rod and come across, march your rod and come across, march your rod and come across.
In the Red Sea.